All right, let's go take our Bibles tonight. We're going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 18 tonight. 1 Samuel chapter number 18. I just think this is kind of cool. There's a website that my brother-in-law Andrew told me about, that it's an AI generator of images. And it is free, and it's for sermons and how you can actually go on there and tell it to create a sermon slide. So I went to this thing and I said, I want you to make a sermon slide that's got the title, A Friend for the Fire, and make it look like a house on fire. That was my only prompt, and this is what it spit out in less than 30 seconds. Isn't that crazy? And I downloaded it, and here it is on I just think that's insane how AI is doing stuff like that. And so anyway, I just wanted to share how cool that was in my opinion. So you guys might not care. Really funny? Thanks, Kellen. I appreciate you being very humored by it. You may have been the only one, but I thank you for that. Okay, I love you too, bud. Well, tonight we are talking, we've been in 1 Samuel, just kind of felt like it was a natural flow into some of the Wednesday night series just to talk about some ideas from 1st, 2nd Samuel. We might not do every night through the summer of this, but I think there's some great things to learn about the history of Israel and what's going on here with how it even connects to the New Testament. But I came across this as I was studying for last week's sermon, but this topic really stretched out over the next several chapters. So I wanted to create this message for tonight because it kind of just really plays into the whole story of Saul. And last week we talked about the having our emotions under control, not throwing things against the wall, and things like that. Sorry, there's somebody gave me a story afterwards about something like that. So, not that we're pointing anybody out. So, but the point about controlling those emotions and anger and jealousy and all of those things. And so, but before that, there's this beautiful story of friendship that we see that is developed between David and Jonathan. Really, they're unlikely friends. They're friends that really should not have been, honestly. Because, really, if you think about it, David is rivaling Jonathan for position of king. He's the rival, but it's not only that, but eventually David marries into the family and he becomes a brother-in-law. But you're going to see in the story, Jonathan takes David's side over his own father's side so many times and proves himself to be a faithful friend. Even whenever David's going through some of the darkest trials, or we put it this way, the hottest fires of his life. I was thinking about the movie, and you guys may not have seen it, but it's one of those movies put out by the Kendrick brothers, the Fireproof, that movie Fireproof, and they've put out several different ones, and I will say this, they progressively had got better at acting. Their first ones were not so good. They had to hire a professional for that one. That one still wasn't even the greatest, but they're getting a lot better. But Fireproof had a line in there. The main character, Kirk Cameron, is a firefighter, and he says this, that and it's in a fire, you don't leave your partner behind. You don't leave your partner behind in a fire. And what he was talking about is the idea of don't leave your partner, your spouse behind when things are going hard or tough. Don't leave your partner behind. And it's true, though. You would talk to a fireman, and they would say that when you're in a fire, you got to stay together because to split up could cause danger, and maybe one has something follow them that need help. And so just really initiating that thought in their mind. Don't leave your partner in a fire. Don't leave them behind. Don't part ways. Stay together because that's where strength is. That's where safety is. And I think that's what you can say about Jonathan. Really, even more so, I would say Jonathan, I'm sure David was a great friend, but from the vantage point of the Bible, Jonathan shows himself to be an extraordinary friend, even more so than maybe David. I mean, not to say that David, like I said, biblically speaking, we don't have a proof of this, but what we do have proof of, Jonathan steps up time and time again, putting his own life on the line for a friend who is really rivaling his job. And it's just something that I think that we are starting to lose. We're starting to lose how important it is to have good friends. We're starting to really lose how important it is for, at no matter what age we are, it's not just important for kids to have friends. Are we listening? It's not just important for kids to have friends. I know that there has always been that conversation about, if you put your kids into a public school or versus a homeschool or even Christian school, someone might say, well, a homeschool kid, they're going to have any friends. Well, they can still have friends. I mean, they just might not come from their school because, well, their school is just, them. But they can still develop friends. Oh, at the Christian school, they're not going to have as many friends to choose from. No, they're probably not, but that's okay. At the public school, they're going to be finding wrong friends. Well, they might still find good friends. I did when I went to public school. We find it important to make sure our kids have good friends. But let's be honest. How many of us are still friends with all those kids that we were friends with up and through high school? I have a couple. And the couple that I still talk to are the ones I thought I would never talk to. I mean, they weren't my really good friends in high school. And the ones that I still talk to now, they're the ones I played football with, but it wasn't like I was like buddy with them. But now we talk and we text and things like that, but very few. Do you know that for us as Christians, it's important for us as adults to have good friends? And I'm talking friends that are not just your spouse or your brother or your sister. I'm talking friends that are outside of even your family, people who can speak into your life. There is a drought right now of friends. And I think it started shifting and changing with let me just go back a ways. I was reading in a book where it says the downfall of society and fellowshipping is whenever all the activity of a household moved to the backyard instead of the front yard. It sounds silly, but it's true. Also with the invention of the garage door. Whenever you could go into your house, shut the garage door, and never even know who your neighbors are because now you're inside or in the backyard. That started somewhere about there. But then you go into the invention of social media and Facebook, that now we can have a multiple of friends, but they're all so far away, and we just see them through a screen. We then started going through the COVID years where it's like we can't meet up anymore, and it's not good for us to meet up and actually be around each other, and this person's sick, and this one's got a sniffle, and so we distance ourselves even more. Friendships have suffered. And I can even vouch for my own self that when friendships suffer, you kind of start feeling alone. And when you go through a dark time, then you might not have somebody to look to talk to. It's so interesting how God will bring people into your life to become a friend. I think it was last Tuesday, I got together for lunch with a pastor friend of mine, Pastor Kyle Osfeld over in Pampa, Texas. Pastor Kyle is the one that once a year I usually preach for him, and so I think in September I'll be there preaching. But that friendship was a very unlikely start. What I mean by that is he hired me right after college to come and work at his church as a youth pastor. While I was on staff, he treated me like I worked for him. Him and I's relationship, I would say that both of us would say that it wasn't the best. As a matter of fact, there were times I think we didn't like each other. There was times that we disagreed with each other. And even when I left, admittedly, I would say that I don't think I left in a right way. And when I ended up leaving, it wasn't like it should have been. When we moved back here to Elk City, it took us a while to start talking again. And what I felt on Tuesday, though, is that, 2 years into being here, Amy, I think it was, he started saying, hey, do you want to get together? Let's meet up. And he started initiating a friendship and started talking to us. And I was completely surprised that we actually reunited a friendship. But I'm telling you what, Tuesday, when I was there with him, I was just very thankful to have a friend that I could sit down and talk about ministry and talk about family and him to pour out each other's hearts. And we try to solve the world's problems. It doesn't really ever work out that way. But an unlikely friendship had formed through some adversity, honestly. But I'm thankful for his friendship. I'm thankful for a friend who will sometimes challenge me on things. And Amy could vouch for this. Kyle has no problem challenging you on things if he feels like he needs to. I'm thankful for that. You see, that's something that I need. And I'm thankful that I can say that Kyle is a friend of mine. And I'm thankful that I can look at here and say, many of you are friends of mine, but we have to all admit, we all need a friend. A friend who not will just tell us what we need to hear, what we want to hear, but friends that will tell us what we need to hear. The iron sharpens iron. I could tell a very embarrassing story about Amy and I and how that our friendship actually started with, we had a verse that was basically our verse. Please, this sounds so corny. Should I even tell it? I mean, I don't know. Already into it. I could stop. That's the wonderful thing about being the pastor. I could fully abandon an illustration and say, I'll leave it up to your imagination. But here, what happened is that Amy and I, we got a common friendship started between a mutual friend, and he's a missionary now in Sri Lanka, but we started, just trying to keep each other accountable, and the friendship that we developed with this guy, John, and ourselves was we used the verse, iron sharpens iron, and some reason we started calling ourselves the ironing board gang, and we would just keep each other accountable and things like that. It was so silly, and we would pose with an ironing board at a picture. We went to a fancy, what was it called? A banquet, dressed up, and we snuck an ironing board into the hotel that it was at, and we took a picture with it, me and John Landy and her, and we surprised her with it, and she was not on board with it. Anyway, but a friendship based on sharpening each other. And there were times that we would sharpen Amy, there was times that she would sharpen us, but it was good. That's how it started. You see, Jonathan and David become friends, and their heart was knit together. Now, I want you to look at where it says in verse number 1 of chapter 18, where it says, "And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul." Now, there are people who have tried to take this and really warp it into a relationship that's not just two friends, but more like lovers. That's not what's happening here. There's nothing that gives us this intention that they were lovers in any way. This is just two men who've bonded, and they're bonded over war. They've bonded over living in the kingdom. They've bonded over the relationship with Saul. They just have a deep connection. Their soul was knit. And I want to tell you something. I think something that also about this is the reason why this is actually done is that God brought this friendship together. This is a friendship that's brought by God. It's not like it was forced by Jonathan or David. I believe this is a God-ordained friendship that happened. It said, "And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. And Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle." Notice really what is happening. It's like if you were to look at the cultural things that's going on here, David is receiving pretty much everything from Jonathan that says, "You're it, bud. You're the next king. I'm giving you my sword. I'm giving you my bow. I'm giving you..." He went from shepherd's clothes to royal clothes. You see this, what happened here? Jonathan can get more clothes. That's not a problem with him. David went from the actual garments of maybe even a warrior or a shepherd into the garments of royalty because Jonathan and David were friends. That's what a true friend does. It's built on something that begins in the soul. So really you can think of it this way. Godly friendships begin with a bond of the soul. And that's why I think it's important that we have a common bond with our friends over one thing, and that is a soul thing that we have in Christ. I'm not saying that your best friend might be the most devout Christian, but I think, and I believe we can stand by this, we need Christian friends. We need godly friends. Because whenever you're going through the fire, it might be easy for the person to say, you know what, your marriage is tough, you ought to leave. Whenever it might be that a godly friend might say, let's try to do something different. Maybe let's try what God says first. I'm not saying that will always end up being that you don't leave. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that maybe it is that a godly friend will say, hey, instead of hanging on to that bitterness, why don't we try to do what God says, like forgive? And instead of doing this, maybe do that. See, a good godly friend has perspective from a Bible point of view. Whereas a person who's not saved might have a perspective of the worldly point of view. Now, sometimes those things align, but sometimes, often, they don't. So their souls were knit together. Jonathan was a prince and David was a shepherd, but it was not the things that they had necessarily in common of their background. It was the soul that was knit together. Their hearts were knit. They both loved, I think you can see this, they both loved God deeply. You can see throughout 1 Samuel 14 and even in chapter 17 that there was a great love for God that Jonathan had. I believe you can see in chapter 14, chapter 17. You can obviously see the love of God that David had when he faced Goliath. And here's what happened is their contagious love for God drew them in for one another. You see that David was given the robe, the armor, the sword, all symbols of that royal possession. And this was more than kindness. Here's what it was. It was a humility. It was humility that Jonathan showed towards David. You know what sometimes makes friendships of the soul difficult? Pride. Isn't pride the ruinous of all good friendships? Man, I could tell you stories about friendships that have just been dashed to pieces because one person's pride got in the way. Maybe both. I could tell you stories of family members who've had that happen. Friendships have just been destroyed. Relationships destroyed because of pride. I was thinking through some of because the book of Proverbs says so much about friendship. And here are just a couple verses that really, I think, could even bring it out to us even a little bit more. Proverbs 18:24 says that man that hath friends must show himself what? Friendly. Do you know sometimes the thing is we might sit back and complain. I don't have a friend that I can go through the fire with. I don't have a friend that wants to be by my side. The question might be this: are you friendly? Because if you're not friendly, that might be the reason why you don't have friends to walk through the fire with you. It says, then there is one that's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. You know, I think that we oftentimes apply that to Jesus because, of course, he does. But I think that if you just keep it in its context, we're talking about friendships here of earthly kind. I think what he's saying is that sometimes brothers will fight and not talk to each other, but you find a good friend, you'll go through the fire together. That sticks closer than your brother. And if you were to look at David, is that not true with what happened with him? Jonathan was closer of a friend than his own brothers like Eliab and others. He had a friend that stuck closer than a brother. Another one's Proverbs 27:9 says, ointment and perfume rejoice the heart. So doth the sweetness of a man's friend by hearty counsel. In other words, how many of you have walked into a house and the smell and the aroma is like, man, it smells good in here. Like maybe you walk in and someone's making banana bread or cinnamon buns or something like that. You know, you walk in and go, man, Amy's making lasagna. I smell garlic. Oh, it smells so good in here. That aroma is like makes you happy. That's what he's saying. A friend who gives good godly counsel should lift up your spirit. It should bring rejoicing to your heart. See, real friendships, they're not based on what someone can do for you, but on a shared commitment that we're going to honor God together. We're going to do what's best for each other. What can I do for you? How can I be a blessing to you? That's what really true friendships are built on. If a friendship's just built on, all right, David, what can you do for me? That's not a very good friendship. David, if you could help me out, I'll be your friend. Well, that's not a good friendship. That friendship will only last as long as what David is providing me what I want. As long as he keeps on buying furniture, refurbishing, and giving it to me, I will like him as my friend. If he stops, then I'm not his friend anymore. That's not a good friendship. Another point is this, is that godly friendships, they protect and they also encourage. And so Jonathan, if you were to look at verse, I think it's chapter 20. Let's skip over to chapter 20 now. Like I said, this goes through several different things. But chapter number 20, verse 12 through 17. And you have to understand, this is in the midst of a tumultuous time in David's life. Like I said, he's going through the fire right now. He's running from Saul. And it says, and Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when have I sounded my father about tomorrow any time, or the third day? And behold, if there be good toward David, and I then sin not unto thee, and show it to thee, the Lord do so and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do the evil, then I will show it to thee, and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace, and the Lord be with thee, and he has been with my father. He says, and thou shalt not only while yet I live show me kindness of the Lord, that I die not, but also thou shalt not cut off the kindness from the house forever. Now what's going on here is that David is running from Saul, and Jonathan's saying, listen, I'm going to warn you, but I want you to promise me this, that if I do this, that in return you show kindness not just to me, but also to my family. Does that make sense? He's saying, please help protect my family. And so Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies. And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So here's what happens, is that whenever Jonathan actually goes back to his dad's house, David's not there for this mealtime. Remember how Saul picked up a javelin and threw it at David? Saul now picks up a javelin and throws it at Jonathan. He's so mad at Jonathan because he knows that he's communicating with David, but he's not going to give David up because he swore he's not going to. And so now he's going to go to David and basically tell him, you cannot come back because my dad is going to kill you. He's going to take your life. He's tried to take mine. He's going to take yours. Do not come back. See, this friendship was one that protected each other, one that encouraged each other. But I want you to look at what he says there. He talks about how he says that, he says, I want you to make sure that you forever protect my house. Don't cut off the enemies, but protect my family. And now here's what he says. Thou shalt not cut off, verse 15, the kindness of my house forever. I just want to point out something to you. He says, I'm going to help save you, but I want you to do something for me. Don't cut off my house forever. In a typical overthrow of the government of that day, the thing that you should do if you're David is to eliminate and annihilate the bloodline of Saul. Does that make sense? Okay, so later on, Saul and Jonathan are fighting in a battle, and they both die at the end of 1 Samuel. They both die in this battle. Unfortunately, Jonathan continued to follow his father, committed to the nation of Israel and committed to his father still, but he dies in battle. And there comes a point in time when David is king. And the question is brought up, is there anyone yet of the house of Saul that I can show kindness to? Now, some might think that this is a plot for him to find out who's still alive that was part of the house of Saul, that he could kill them and take over the bloodline. But do you remember who it is that's still alive that time? It's a man who was crippled because he was during that battle that his father died, he was being carried by a servant lady. And she tripped and fell on him, and basically he became paralyzed from the waist down. That's what it sounds like. And he's in a place called Lodebar. And that man's name is Mephibosheth. And he is the son of Jonathan. And whenever he shows up, Mephibosheth is scared to death that this is the end of his days. He's been hiding out for all these years. Someone ratted him out, and now he's going to die. And when he shows up, you know what David does? He says, you will no longer live in Lodebar. You will live in the kingdom, and you will eat at my table, just as your family was kind to me and your dad specifically. Listen, he kept his word right here. What Jonathan asked him to do, he kept that word. Now listen, that's an amazing thing. As a matter of fact, later on when Absalom is chasing after David and runs him out of town, Mephibosheth is left behind. And so Mephibosheth is left behind, and David thinks that, okay, Mephibosheth's siding against me now. And when he comes back, he says, David, I'm so sorry. He can't walk. I could not get anyone to take me with you, and I was left behind. And David brought him back in again. You see, that's the type of friendship that he had. It wasn't that he was just friends with Jonathan. That friendship led over and poured into the son, Mephibosheth. What an interesting story that is, that application there of that. It's not just about being kind to the person there, but also to the family. Can I give us just a little piece of advice? If you want a good friend, don't be mean to their family. I mean, right? If I want a good guy friend, don't criticize the wife. I mean, that's not going to earn you any favor. She don't want you to come over. She doesn't want you to watch football with him. I don't want that jerk to come, or that guy to come over. You know, we don't be so critical of the family. So this is a really piece of advice there. But here's what happens is that they encourage each other. I'll be there for you. I'm going to help protect you. And when you're going through the fire, I will. Listen, here's what's interesting, is that Jonathan doesn't back out of the friendship when things got tough. As a matter of fact, when the friendship got tough, he went through the fire with him. He walked in there bravely to help his friend David. Now listen, this is something for us to think about. Are there friends that go through the fire that we are willing to walk through the fire with? Do you have a friend like that whenever the trials of life come your direction, that they will stand with you and walk with you through the fire? Isn't it true when the fires of life start, we do find out who our friends really are? There is some controversy, I guess you could say, online these days about pastors and who's friends with what pastors, and this person's not just like that person, and that person's not just like that. So everyone's getting all divided, kind of like what things are like right now in the political schemes today. Everybody seems to be divided over everything. But can I tell you what's interesting is that you find out who your friends are whenever maybe you're the one being canceled, and then all of a sudden people are standing up and saying, you know what, I love this guy. I'm thankful for that guy. Isn't it true that's awesome to have people who will stand in your corner like that? And that's what, listen, Saul was trying to cancel David, and Jonathan said, nope, that's not going to happen. He's my friend, and I won't let that happen to him. So here's what we see. It's chapter 23, and this is really what I want to get to as the main thrust of tonight's message. Chapter number 23, verse number 15. This is David's been running. Saul's been pursuing David. This is the times where he's been hiding out in caves. If you look here at 1 Samuel chapter 23, starting in verse 15, it says, and David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the wood and strengthened his hand in God. And he said unto him, fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee. That also Saul my father knoweth. And the two made a covenant before the Lord, And David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went into his house. Do you see that what a beautiful thing it is to have a good friend, is that Jonathan comes to him once again, walks into the lion's den to go out away from his father, who's already thrown a spear at him, he's going out to find David. When he does, he says this, I'm coming out. Let me ask you a question. Don't you believe the tension in Saul's kingdom was a little bad at that time? I mean, it's kind of like dad's at home. I'm going to go out for the grocery store or something. Dad's home, I'm leaving. That's the kind of mentality that it was. Saul had his ups and downs, throwing spears, loving and prophesying and then cursing. It was a mess with Saul. And yet here's what we see is that Jonathan's going home to that every day. Jonathan's going home to the promise of Saul being the king and him coming in next. And so he goes out to find David. He doesn't rat him out. Saul's been looking for him. As a matter of fact, in chapter 24, you can understand why he's fearful, because Saul got so close to him in chapter 24 is where he was able to go into the cave and take off a piece of his garment. Where David got so close to Saul, he took off a piece of his garment. Listen, there's a reason why David is scared. He legitimately thinks Saul's going to kill him. And here's what he does. Jonathan comes out with a spirit of not like, buddy, you need to get out of town. You're causing me problems back home. He says this, I come out not thinking about me. Jonathan's not coming out to the woods to think about himself. Jonathan comes to the woods to find David to encourage him. Notice this. He goes into the fire to encourage him, and it says this. He does so by doing this. It says he comes in and he says he comes to strengthen his hand in God. Well, what does this mean to strengthen your hand in God? What does this even mean? Here's what one commentator put it. It says he's risking his life to travel to encourage David, not just emotionally, but spiritually. He's going out to encourage him. The idea of strengthening his hand in God means that he's going out to encourage, yes, but even more to make firm or strong. To make firm or to make strong. I was thinking about this, Brother Larry, about how that we had a time where our fence had blown over, and I remember when that happened, and you went out there with Miss Sherry and you started digging holes and you started pouring concrete to strengthen that, because there was a time I drove by and he had pulled out the actual old pieces, the raw iron that was out there, and he had stuck in these the 4x4s, aren't they? Stuck in the 4x4s in the hole. And they were just kind of all laying all sorts of different directions, and they're just kind of in the hole that day. And I drove by, and I knew that was not the end product, but it made me think about how that there's no firm foundation right there. That would be a wonky-looking fence, you know? But the thing is, what Brother Larry did when he was done building the fence, he had come back through, and he had taken concrete, and he had made sure to get it wet and make sure to put enough in to make sure that it was solid, and that it was solid enough to make sure that it could stand against the Oklahoma wind. See where this illustration is going? That's what David was doing. If you would think about that's how Jonathan was doing. You can think of David this way. David is like the fence post in the hole that's kind of rattling around and has no firm foundation. He's running here and running there. He's just running for his life. And Jonathan comes out and adds the concrete, adds the solid foundation. He's coming out to do so by saying, I want to make you firm. I want to make you strong. Now, I want you to notice this. It's not that he's coming out to make him firm or strong by going, good job, just keep on running. You got this. Just keep it up. I'm with you. No. He says the purpose of him making him strong was to make him not strong in Jonathan, not to make him strong in himself, not to make him strong against Saul, but to make him strong or firm in God. Friends, that's what a good friend does in the fire. He strengthens you in your relationship with God. Here's what Jonathan did. Jonathan reminded him of a few things. Jonathan reminded him of who he was. He was anointed by God. Jonathan reminded him who he was, that he was anointed by God. If you look at that verse where it says, then verse number 17, it says, "Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, for thou shalt be king over Israel." He's reminding him, listen, Samuel came and anointed you to be the next king. You were chosen by God. You were anointed by God. You are David, no longer the shepherd. You're David, the future king of Israel. But he also reminded him of God's promise. What was God's promise? You will be king of Israel. Well, what does that mean? You don't have to fear. Wait, your dad's chasing me like a lunatic. What do you mean I don't have to fear? God's promised you'll be king. Does that make sense? If God's promised you'll be king, which means this, you will live past these moments. You will make it through this hard time. Not only that, but he also said, stay faithful. Reminded him, says that God will still stay faithful to you. Even whenever it looked bleak, when things looked bad, here's what he says, fear not. God's going to keep his promise. Fear not. He says, I know this looks hard, but understand this. I believe that what God said will be true. Friends, that's what a good friend does. He reminded you who you were. You are God's. You belong to God. God's got promises that he's laid out for you, and that God will remain faithful to you to keep your life until the time which he's got you to be the next king. See, that wasn't a vague, positive reinforcement. That was specific encouragement that he could look back that was rooted in God. I don't know how else to put this, but we need friends that when we're in the fire that bring us back to God. Things are getting out of control in your life. Let's go back to the foundation of God. You know what? There are some times that we can do. We can take a good friend, and when they're going through a difficult time, we could really just let them pour their heart out and agree with them on everything. And that's what they want to hear, but sometimes what a good friend needs is iron that sharpens iron. David, you're hiding in this cave. You've been in the cave of Adullam. You've been in the wilderness in the woods. You have been at En-Gedi. You've been hiding out. And at times, you've got to feel really sorry for yourself. And what I'm here to do today is to tell you, man, look up. God's still on your side. Brother, don't stop. Keep fighting, because God's promised us that you will be the king. God said, have no fear. Listen, how do you think it is that he can come back and say, whenever I walk through the valley of the shadow of the death, I will fear no evil. And he says, he makes me lie down in green pastures, but where? Sometimes in the presence of my enemies. David can write Psalms 23 because a friend like Jonathan came by when he was going through the fire and says, buddy, I know it's hard, but don't forget who God is and who you are to God. Now, I look at this and I think about how many of us could be that kind of friend to somebody we know. We got friends in this church who are struggling, who need to have someone say, I'm praying for you, but maybe not just say it, but actually stop and pray with them. You see, I know we're few numbers tonight, but I want us to, for even those who are maybe even listening online, whenever you feel the urge to pray for somebody, it's not weird it should not be weird to look in our church and see someone, arm around someone's shoulder saying, I just feel led to pray with you right now. And pray for them. Maybe it's to encourage them. Maybe it is they feel like they're being forgotten. Maybe they haven't had a friend step up and say something positive in their life. Maybe they need that. Maybe their family is not being encouraged. Maybe their friends are not stepping up. Maybe we can be that person. So here's just a few steps that we could take to maybe help us be a friend who can strengthen our friends in God even today. Following some of this is that we can remind them of God's promises in our life. The Lord, the Bible says, is perfect. He's perfect. And the Lord who is perfect will also be the God who says, nothing will separate us from the love of God. Not height nor depth, nothing can separate us from the love of God. When we feel overwhelmed and we see friends that are being overwhelmed, here's what we can say to them. Don't forget that God is the same God he who has begun a good work in you will finish it. That he will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That he will always be with you. Do you know sometimes that a good Christian, it's not like he forgets these verses, he just needs to be reminded of them. A good Christian might along the way not forget a verse like some of this, that all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. But listen, sometimes they need to be reminded from a friend, God's got promises that he's given you. You know, talking with some of our friends, one of the things that I don't like doing here at the church, but there comes a point in time where I've realized as a pastor, David, I'm sure you know this too, especially in what you do, that you got to start talking about there's coming a time that the end time is coming for them. Their life will be over. And to encourage them even with this, heaven's going to be so great. Heaven's going to be so sweet. Just to encourage them and remind them that the promise that he said, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would not have told you. Sometimes good friends need the truth that heaven is real and heaven is good and Jesus is still good, even in moments of death. Does this make sense? We need friends to remind us of the promises of God that sometimes, I'm speaking mostly to myself and Amy right now, but that our kids might struggle and they might be crazy, but if we train up a child in the way that he should go, that is what he's promised, that he will not depart from it. Listen, I got to do my best and that's all I can do. But what I know is that what Amy and I are doing now is going to be a seed planted there, and I don't want them to leave, but if they do, hopefully they'll come back. That's a promise of God. That's what I have to cling to. As a parent, for some of you who've raised kids, you know what that's like. You're clinging on to the promise of like, God, I've planted this seed, help them come back. That's all we can do is hold on to that promise. Here's something else that maybe we can do. We can also remind them of who they are in Christ, their identity, that they are something great in this life, that they're somebody that Jesus died for, that God sent his only begotten Son to die on a cross for them, that they can be a light in the midst of the fire. Listen, I know you're going through a hard time, but remember where Jesus says, you are the light of the world. Now think about this. If you hide your light under a bushel, how can any man see the light? Now he's talking, and we often sing the little song, I'm going to let it shine. I had another bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. But do you realize he's telling them this in the midst of a world that was eventually going to hate and persecute Christians? What did he tell them to do? In the midst of the fires that you go through, be a light. That's what he said. You're going to sing the song, great. But he's telling this to a guy like Peter, who in just a few years is going to die for his faith. He's talking to Thomas, who will eventually die for his faith. He's talking to people who are going to be persecuted. He said, in the midst of your persecution, be a light. Don't hide it under a bushel. Be a light that all men can see. That's what he tells them to do. Remind our friends that are going through a hard time. God has got a purpose for you, and you are his. And he wants you to reflect him even in the trials that you are going through. Sometimes we have to remind them, we don't understand why you're here, but God knows why you're here. And one purpose we all have is no matter what season of life we're in, is to glorify him. Sometimes we, as Christians and as friends, we need to seek out our friends when they're down. We need to enter into the forest. We need to go to the cave where they're at and strengthen their hands. Sometimes we will go and say, we'll be a friend as long as the friendship's, I don't have to deal with their drama. Have you ever had a friend like, as long as I don't have to deal with their drama, I can be their friend. Sometimes we have to friendships are messy. Sometimes friendships are messy. And sometimes we have to go to where they are. We have to seek out the David in our life, to go to their hiding place, to go to the place that they are struggling and show up for their life. Sometimes it might be that you visit them. Maybe sometimes it is that when they're on your mind, you call them. Maybe you sit with them. Maybe you read scripture with them. Maybe you just Sit with them even at church. I just think about this is like, I don't know how to say this without being weird, but how many more Sundays do we have left with some people here? And they listen, and this is not a criticism because I don't want to make it sound like that, but I don't think it should ever be that some of those people sit by themselves on a church Sunday. I think that we ought to have people who are like, we want to sit by them. Be a friend. Sit next to them. Sing with them. Encourage them. Some of the people won't move from where they're at. And you know who I'm probably talking about. They're not moving. But here's what a good friend does. I'll move. I'll move and I'll go sit with them. You see what I'm saying? That's what a friend does. We'll go into those places. We'll get out of our comfort zone. We'll do something to lift them up. I already kind of said this point, but pray with them, but not just for them. Pray with them. Remind them that in the midst of their discouragement, you're not just there to say, hey, I'm praying for you, but I'm going to actually pray with you. Speak aloud their name. Put a hand on their shoulder. That means a lot to a person. And then in the very end, here's what we have to do. We have to point them back to Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2 says this, we're looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. A good friend always points them back to Jesus. Now, there's a lot we could say. There's a lot we could say about friendship. But I think the bottom line is this, is that we need to help friends grab a hold in the midst of their fire, grab a hold of God again when their grip is weak. When they're struggling, when their grip is weak and they're physically weak, spiritually weak, and it's just getting hard, we need to help them grab firm again on God. Proverbs 27:17 is where the verse is, iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. And Proverbs 17:17 says this, a friend loves at all time, and a brother is born for adversity. We're going to love through the hardships. We're going to love through the good times. We're going to love through the bad times. So, questions just to consider tonight. Are you a friend that loves in the adversity that your friends are going through? Do you have a friend that would want you to be the friend in adversity? If not, a friend must show himself friendly. And if we get to the end of our life and we don't have friends, that's a sad place to be. Let's make sure we're building up friendships along the journey. I'll end with this note, but I think I've said this before somewhere along the way. But one of the coolest things that I saw was at Brother Charles Troll's funeral. Charles Troll is Miss Kim down in Altus that had been her dad, Brother Han's father-in-law. He was a pastor for many years. And when things first were getting started here in Elk City, he came up for like a month, was it? They preached 4 or 5 Sundays here back in 2012. He was here. He preached revival for us, several different things. And one of the coolest things that Amy and I got to witness was his funeral. And there was 3 friends. And they'd sat down over coffee one time after a fellowship meeting, and they basically started talking about death and the end of their life. They'd been friends for years, and they said, well, Charles, I want you to preach at my funeral. He says, well, what if I die before you? Well, then I guess he'll preach at my funeral. What if we're both gone? Well, then I don't know. I want somebody to preach my funeral. So they started talking about funerals. So what ended up happening, they came to the agreement, whoever passes away first, that both of those guys would do the funeral. And then whoever passed away next, the last guy would do the funeral, and whoever passed away last had to find somebody to do his funeral. Well, we went to the funeral of Brother Charles Troll. He was the second one in the friends to pass away. And his friend got up there. It was an amazing service. He talked about his friend. And he talked about Charles Troll as, with an honest heart, just how good of a friend he was. Got up there and told great stories, but most of all, you just saw him, because he loved the family so much, strengthen the family. Like a dad, honestly, like would encourage the family that was left behind. And I'll never forget that at the end of the service, he had preached like an old independent Baptist preacher, walking up and down aisles, holding his Bible and saying amen. This is about a funeral. And he got to a point where he had kind of gone back on one side and said, well, it's about all I had to say about my good friend Charles Stroll. And he turned around, and I'll just never forget it. He lifted up his Bible. He said, "Charles, I tried to do you good, and I'll see you soon." And he turned around and walked out. And he died just less than a year later. But what a wonderful testimony to have a friend. Have a friend like that. I saw it again on last Wednesday whenever L.C. Price passed away, and he had his friend Tom Johnson get up and talk about him as a friend. Friend, we want people who at our end days will get up and talk with an honesty and say, "I love this person." That's the kind of friendships we need to try to develop. I've been convicted about that since last Wednesday. I want to have a friend who will talk about me that way. Not because they found something they could get out of me, but because I was a true and loving friend to them. That's what I really want. And it's never too late to develop good friendships. It's always a good time to develop a friendship, okay? You never know who it is, and let me tell you one thing. We often don't develop friendships because we have had friends that have hurt us, right? How many of us are guarded sometimes when it comes to friendships? But sometimes it's the person, somehow like a Kyle Osfeld, who will become one of your closest friends. And I'm thankful for things like that. God brings friends into your life. Sometimes people you don't even expect to be a friend that will last a lifetime. Let's continue to develop those and be a friend in the fire, okay? Let's close with a word of prayer. Thank you for your attention tonight. Just an encouragement to be a good friend. Hey, strengthen each other in the Lord. Don't strengthen each other in politics or on the things that are going on today. Find the strength in the Lord, because everything else will fail you. The only firm foundation is strengthening each other in God. God, we do thank you that you are a firm foundation. The world around us looks like it could fall apart at any moment. I'm thankful that you are a friend that does, as the Bible even says, stick closer than a brother. That you are near to the brokenhearted, that you are there for us. But God, I am extremely thankful for friends that you put in our lives. Friends that really, they even beyond family, because we're so thankful for our families, but people who are not part of our family, who choose to be our friends, we're thankful for those people. Thankful for the love that they have for us. Help us to be a kind of friend that the Bible speaks about. Help us to follow even examples of Jonathan. And Lord, I really believe that the example Jonathan followed was just following after what it means to be a good, godly friend, because he sees how you treated him. And so God, help us to be a good friend tonight. We love you. We thank you for all that you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all.